Sorry, say that again?
You are actually able to save taxpayers' money when you house people with the support instead of them sleeping on the streets, having to stay at a shelter or in a temporary accommodation.
So it's cheaper to give people homes than let them... Oh, wow.
Exactly.
Okay. Hey folks, it's episode 15 of If I Rule the World, and I'm taking on homelessness, as you probably heard in that intro there. I'm not doing it all by myself. I have got a guest today. I've got Juha Kahila, who lives in Finland and has been working in the field of homelessness for over 10 years. He started as a frontline support worker and is now the international coordinator of an organization called the Y Foundation. We're going to hear more about that in a minute. So a little bit of scene setting here. While some of the biggest economies in the world, the richest countries in the world, like the UK, Germany, France, the US, are seeing crisis levels of homelessness up by 50% in the last decade in some countries, Finland has been steadily reversing that trend. The Finnish story has been really widely reported on. It's been talked about as a country that's really tackling the question of how to end homelessness once and for all. And spoiler alert, there is a really painfully obvious solution to homelessness, which is, why don't we just give people homes? And I know that as soon as I say that, there's a voice in your head, because there's a voice in my head too, saying, that can't be right, can it? We can't just give people homes. Surely they've got to earn them first. Well, there are all sorts of reasons why people end up homeless. Job loss, family breakdown, addiction, mental health issues, just to name a few. But the weird thing is that somehow the system, our mindsets, we're wired to expect or even demand that when someone is literally at rock bottom on the street, somehow they've got to figure all their shit out before they can get a permanent home. Finland says, nah, people need a permanent home first. And by permanent, I simply mean somewhere where you're not living in fear of being asked to leave without any control, any agency, and very little notice. So Finland's Housing First scheme is a national, mainstream, and I'll also add championed by a right-leaning politician, homelessness policy that, along with the Y Foundation that I mentioned earlier, so this is Finland's fourth largest landlord, repurposes crisis shelters, old office buildings, etc. to provide a permanent home for people who have none. So, there's formalities, there are rental agreements. People can claim state benefits to be used to pay towards the rent. There are support workers available on site to help people get back on their feet. But the idea that underpins all of this is that recovering from addiction, mental health issues, getting yourself back on your feet is much more likely when you have a home first. The success of Housing First Finland is really hard to ignore. The latest data from the OECD, so that's the Office of Economic Cooperation and Development, has Finland ranked lowest of European countries, America, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and Korea, in the number of people experiencing homelessness. Now, I'm going to ask you to suspend any disbelief that might be setting in, because I think Scandinavian countries seem to get a lot of things right: healthcare, education, transport. But there's often a sense that they're somehow up there in the fabled lands of the far north and somehow magically spared all of the crap that the rest of the world has to deal with. So maybe the logical conclusion is whatever they're doing up there cannot be done anywhere else. I'll say two things to that. One, Housing First is a concept that was made in America. But as head of international affairs at the Y Foundation, Juha believes it can be adapted to work absolutely anywhere. And to that end, Juha is actually working with partners in the States, in Sao Paulo in Brazil, South Africa, in several countries, all of whom clearly think it's worth paying attention to what they're doing in Finland, a country that has dared to do things differently and seems to be getting it right.
Finland as a country, of course, we have been the happiest country in the world 7 years in a row. And then Of course, that's something, and I think there's a link between the homelessness as well. So for the past 12 years in a row, the number of homeless people have been going down in Finland. And last month we get the latest statistics from last year, and the official number is 3,429 people without a permanent home of their own. And of course, we are really proud of that. And I think the main thing is that if you ever visit, for example, in the city of Helsinki, which is the capital of Finland, you won't find people sleeping in tents. You won't find encampments, and you rarely will see anyone sleeping on the streets. So that's rare nowadays in Finland, and of course that's something that we are really proud of. But it has taken a lot of hard work, a lot of dedicated politicians, and yeah, at the end of the day, it has paid off. But of course, in the 1980s, when we started, we had over 20,000 homeless people. So that gives you the scale what we have been able to do, and then the scale that these things doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work and dedication from all the people in the society.
So 20,000 homeless did you say was that 1985 in a population of how many?
Roughly 5.5 million.
Right. Wow. So that's significant. I just wanted to track back to something you said. You've been the happiest country for 7 years running. What does that mean to you, like as someone working in the field that you do? Like, how does that make you feel when that Finland has that reputation abroad?
It makes me happy. Mm-hmm. But I think, like I said, there is this link, so that in Finnish society, there is this kind of belief that we should take care of everyone. Mm-hmm. And then most of the times, the most vulnerable people in the society are those who don't have a home of their own. And then when we take care of them, then the whole society is better for everyone, and everyone feels more happy when we can help those in need. And I think that has remained the same since after the Second World War, basically in Finland, and it's in our DNA. But it has been, and then it's a little bit of a joke as well, because the Finnish people, we don't smile that often, and we don't like to have small talks and these kind of things. But we are happy what we have, and we are happy that we have a safe and secure society which take care of the most vulnerable people, and that makes us quite happy.
That's brilliant. Well, to be honest, it sounds like you're speaking of some parallel universe that most I dream of. Like, where do you think that comes from in Finnish culture? It's so puzzling to me to hear someone speak like that, like what you've just described, that I'm like, how did you get there? Or how did we lose our way, maybe?
After the Second World War, we lost a lot of land to Russia, and nearly 500,000 people were left wrong side of the border. And then when they move back to the new Finnish border, we need to house them. Right. So we need new homes, and we started building state-subsidized affordable housing. So I think there is that kind of mentality that, we need to make sure that everyone has a home of their own, and it's the foundation for everything else in your life, that you have a roof over your head and you don't have to think about where you're going to spend the next night. But I think that history still carries on still today, and we have those strong memory lines and links to those times, and that's why we think that it's a human right that everyone has home of their own.
So you brought us to 1985. What happened next?
That was one of the turning points, and that's when Y-Foundation was founded. So the 5 biggest cities in Finland decided that they need this kind of non-political, non-profit organization to acquire homes for people in need. And then in 1985, we started with 6 apartments, and now the number is over 19,000. So it has been quite a ride at the Y-Foundation as well. But then in 85, then comes the 1990s. We had a big national recession here in Finland. But one of the key things that happened during those years was that, the government still pushed the construction of the state-subsidized affordable housing, because, of course, they knew that the need is there and it will be bigger than ever once we get over the recession and people need homes that they can afford to live. That was the second turning point, second. And then the third one is, I think, 2008, when we started the Housing First, when we did the systemic change into Housing First, and which meant that, we changed the whole system, how we work in the homelessness services. So there is, people don't have to stop drinking first or stop using drugs, or they don't have to get help to their mental health challenges, but home is the foundation where everything starts, and then the support comes in. It's an integrated system. So that was the third turning point, and I think that it has really paid off, and the one thing that is different in Finland compared to many other countries in Europe is that we did the whole systematic change into housing first. So we didn't start with a small pilot or a project here and there, but we changed the whole system, which meant that we renovated almost all the shelters and temporary accommodation into permanent homes, because we knew that when we want to do housing first, we need to have even more permanent apartments available for people. So we renovate them into these housing first units, which means that, there can be 50 apartments in one building, and then there's the support on site 24/7 downstairs available for people when needed.
I'm assuming a lot of my listeners will not have heard of this. Is going to be the first time they hear about housing first. What is that?
It means that first, homeless people, what they need is home and tailor-made support. And home is like the first thing. And then together with the support, it creates this housing first model. And then before we work with the housing first in Finland, we work the old way, which is like this staircase model, which means that first people need to take care of their addictions, then they need to take care of the other problems in their life, and then at the end of the ladder, there is this final prize, which is like the home of your own. But we realized that it's really hard to take care of those other things in your life if you don't know where we're going to sleep the next night. So all your efforts and all your thinking and all your powers goes to that. Where you're going to find the next meal, next drink, and where you're going to spend the night. But when we move the system that first you get the home, you don't need to think about where you're going to spend the next night. You have the safe place. Then it's easier to take care of those other things in your life as well, with the support offered by the support workers, of course.
So why, sorry, I know that you're going to be like, wow, why don't you get this? But for someone who has lived, I've lived in a number of countries, but like the UK's been where I've lived and where I call home now for the longest time of my life. Being a rough sleeper is sort of criminalized here as it is in the States. So I'm genuinely having like a brain glitch as you're talking, because this makes so much sense to me. So I'm trying to understand, how was that lesson learned in Finland, that you need a home first before you can do rehab, before you can take care of all the other issues in your life? How was that lesson learned?
Well, in 2007, we had a housing minister called Mr. Jan Vapaavuori from the National Coalition Party, which is financially on the right side. But when he got the position, he asked one question: how is it so hard to house these people? And then he appointed this working group of 4 Ys, it was called back in the days, and they work certain amount of time, and they came back with a report called Name on the Door, which is basically the framework of the Finnish housing first model. And in that report, they came to the conclusion that first people need home, then the support, and then the other things may happen. They don't happen to everyone, but there is a bigger possibility that people can take care of those other issues in their lives as well. And then he was really impressed by that report, and he used his political power to run through that systemic change. It wasn't easy, and then he needed to convince a lot of municipality leaders and other decision makers. But at the end of the day, his vision won, and then we moved towards this housing first system in Finland.
So do you think it was important that he was a right-leaning politician in terms of like convincing people?
I think it helped. I think it really helped. And of course, in the political party scheme, it was easier for him to convince the other parties, the left-wing parties and center parties and so on. So I think it really mattered that he was from the right wing.
Wow. The sense that I think from a public perception point of view is you've got to work and earn almost earn the right to have a home. That's kind of how we're indoctrinated. So what were the challenges in communicating this to the public and getting the public on board? Was that a big task?
Well, yes, of course, because in 2008 there was a global financial crisis as well, and the systemic change, of course, it needed a new money as well. Of course, we could allocate some of the existing money into the new system, but it needed a new money as well because renovating the shelters and those kind of things, it's not that cheap. So, of course, the first way of the communication is that, housing is a human right. And that's how it should be, that, housing is should not be a privilege for the few, but a human right for all. And that's one of the things. Mm-hmm. And then, like you mentioned in the beginning, I think at this stage, if we look globally, not everyone care about homeless people. Like you said, they should work and, earn their home and these kind of things. And but we turn it another way around. So we have the studies made in Finland, and there are many studies done globally as well, that you are actually able to save taxpayers' money when you house people with the support instead of them sleeping on the streets, having to stay at a shelter or in a temporary accommodation.
Sorry, say that again. So it's cheaper to give people homes than let them... Oh, wow. Exactly. Okay, explain, how do the numbers add up?
There is official statistics that when people are homeless, they use the really expensive emergency services quite often. That means when they have some kind of health issues, they usually need to use the emergency services, which are really expensive. Mm-hmm. They end up jail more often. And a month in a jail costs a lot more than a house with the support. And then they have to stay hospital more often. And a day in a hospital costs a lot more than a month in your own rental apartment, for example. So when you add all these things up, you end up, we have made a study in Finland that you end up saving around 15,000 euros per person per year when they have home of their own and the support they need, compared that they would be on a street or temporary accommodation or a shelter. So that was the another way we communicated it as, hey, if you don't care about the human rights, that housing is a human right, you care about how we use your tax money, and that this is actually a cheaper way to do it. And of course, it creates, better cities for everyone when we take care of the most vulnerable people in our society. Cities, they bloom when no one has to sleep on the streets. They are safer cities for everyone. Businesses, restaurants are doing better, and so on and so on. So we communicate all these things to the public people, and I think it really paid off in that sense.
So housing first, correct me if I'm wrong, is an idea that actually started in America. Is that right?
Yeah, it started in America in early 1990s. By the great Dr. Sam Chemberis.
And you spend a lot of time in the States, or at least you have spent there. How do you describe the situation in the States as someone coming from Finland?
This year I have been in San Francisco and the city of Atlanta, and in San Francisco the situation was quite horrible, to be honest. So there are, many hundreds of people sleeping on the streets with the tents or without tents. And I think, there is no easy fix for that problem because the housing prices are outrageous down there. And the timeline to build affordable housing is anything between 6 to 10 years. So if you start building affordable house today, it may be ready 2030 if you're lucky, or 2034. Wow. So the timeline is so big. So it's a really big problem there. But there is some bright sides as well. So what they have started doing now is that in the downtown of San Francisco there is a lot of empty office buildings. Mm-hmm. So they have started to buy those office buildings and renovate them into permanent homes, which is a little bit faster process. So that's something they have been doing, and I think it's a great that they have done that, because no one can wait 6 to 10 years before there is these affordable homes available. And so it's a big problem. But then again, in Atlanta, the number of homeless people has decreased down there, and there is a really bold mayor, Mr. Andrew Dicken, who has done great work, and they are building hundreds of new affordable homes, and they are buying these vacant office buildings and turning them into affordable homes, and then they are also building these housing first units for people with many support needs. Mm-hmm. And all these different kind of things. But one of the things I was really happy to see in Atlanta was they are also putting a lot of effort on preventing homelessness altogether, which is something that we should do more often, that there would be less people entering into homelessness altogether. So that's something that they have created this, I think it was called housing help desk. So it's like this one office where you can get everything sorted out. If you can't afford to pay the rent, they are able to help you. If you have trouble with the neighbors, they can help you. If you don't know some details about your rent contract, they can help you. So really focus on people that they get the help they need in that one place, so that you don't have to forward them to this next office and then next office, but one place to take care of all the things regarding housing. So I was really impressed by that.
Okay. Actually, prevention is an interesting place to land, because I think there are a lot of assumptions of why people end up either homeless or rough sleepers. Can you just walk us through all the different reasons that you have encountered of why people end up in this situation?
I think nowadays it's, poverty. People can't afford to pay their rent or mortgage because they are rising everywhere. That's the most common reason, I would say. And then, things happen in life. You may get divorced. You may end up in a hospital for a long period of time. You got unemployment. All these kind of normal things, sort of speak, may end up being homeless, because you may not have the financial backup there, for example, in a divorce situation. And of course, some people end up being homeless because of mental health challenges and drug abuse and these kind of things. But more often, those are the consequence when you are already homeless, that then the drugs and mental health challenges come to you. But I think nowadays, when we talk about homelessness, there are more and more people in the public who think that, it's the drug abusement and the mental health challenges that cause the homelessness. But actually, it is usually the other way around, that it's a consequence of homelessness rather than the cause.
Oh, God. Wow. I grew up around not just people without homes, but children without homes. And I never really was able to toughen up about that. It just made me feel awful. I still do. And I end up in this awful situation where I feel immense guilt, and it triggers all kinds of really difficult emotions in me if I walk past someone who's clearly struggling, right? And then I almost immediately switch into, I can't help everyone, or maybe I'm being taken for a ride, or I'm too soft, I need to toughen up. These are things I don't really want to admit, but it is true. And I'm saying it because I wonder how many other people feel like this. I don't know what, does that resonate with you? Do you see that? Do you struggle to get people to see things differently?
Yeah, I think one of the most frightening thing I can think about is that, people stop caring and they just walk by. Because when we are in that situation, we think that, homelessness is business as usual, and it has always been, and homelessness belongs to the cities, and it's a normal thing when it's not. So I hope that, everyone who walks by, they feel something, that this is not right, that there are our fellow citizens, our fellow people on the streets without permanent home where to go by the end of the night.
For me, there's a question like, what's pride? As my sense, whenever I hear that, people won't want to work and they're lazy, my sense is actually, not everyone, but there are a lot of very proud people out there that end up in this situation. So I just wondered if you have a story, or if you can think of someone that you've seen in that situation that has retained those qualities of being proud of, wanting to be proud of themselves, and wanting to be proud of what they do and who they are as a human being, not even just as a job. But is there does pride come into it at all for you?
Well, I think it comes before people end up being homeless, when there is this pride question, that people are too proud to express their problems and challenges for different kind of organizations, or they have so much pride that they won't ask any assistance before it's too late, and they end up being homeless. And then they are so ashamed that can lead to the situation where they are not willing to take the supporter home immediately. So I think the pride plays in that sense, that if people wouldn't have such a high pride in the first place, they would ask the help before they end up being in that situation that they are actually homeless. And then comes the shame. So it's like this double-edged sword in that sense.
Pride comes before a fall. This podcast is only possible with the support of Triodos Bank UK, an ethical and sustainable bank that has been in the game for over 40 years, backing environmentally and socially responsible projects and initiatives like the Cornwall Rural Housing Association, which provides affordable housing for local people in more remote areas of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, or London's largest self-built community, RUS, the Rural Urban Synthesis Society, which provides affordable housing for local people being priced out of their own neighbourhoods. You can find out more about these and other people and planet-friendly projects in the Triodos monthly online newsletter, The Colour of Money. It does feel like if we are going to tackle this, then we do need to hear those stories and get beneath the numbers, you know? So I know that in Finland, you went from having shelters, which is basically looks like a big dormitory for people, to providing homes. Like, what would you say are the most memorable moments for you of giving someone a key to their home for the first time?
Yeah, so not many people knows, but I have been a support worker myself back in the days, and I have this one tenant who got home, and then I was his support worker, and when he had lived there, I think it was 3 or 4 months, then we had a discussion, and he told me that, you know, Juha, without this apartment and support, I would have 2 choices. The number 1 choice is that I would be in jail, and the other choice is that I would be 6 feet under. So I think that's one of the most memorable discussions I had with my tenants, that he was so honest that, you know, these are the other options without this permanent home of my own. And I think that speaks the reality because as we know that the longer people are experiencing homelessness, there is, you know, a big chance that they will die also a lot younger than the other population.
I really love the word home. It's like, you know, it really resonates with me. It's a beautiful word. But it's just struck me that it means so many things. And I just wondered if you can tell me, as someone who's never, and I'm grateful, never ever spent a night where I didn't know where I was going to be. Like, what do you think are the things that people like me will take for granted about having a home that we won't have noticed, beyond the obvious things, obviously?
It's a good question, and I think safety is the first thing that everyone mentions, that you have this safe place. It's your own kingdom. You can be yourself. You don't have to pretend to be anything else. And then like this, of course, you said that don't mention the obvious things, but hot shower whenever you want. You can cook your own meal. You can buy from the store whatever you want. You don't have to think about if I'm able to cook this somewhere. You can meet your family in your own home. You have your own timetables, your own schedules. You have your own mail, which is like we think, mail comes today, but if you don't have permanent address, it's not that easy to calculate when the mail comes and where to pick it up. So these are the usual things that people mention. But the number one thing is the safety and the feeling that you belong somewhere, that you have the foundation for your life. And that you don't have to carry that stress on your shoulders, that where I'm going to spend the next night, where I'm going to get the next meal, is that place safe to sleep, or these kind of things. So you don't have to be so tense. You can just breathe freely. So I think those things makes the biggest difference from the stories I've heard.
So if you were trying to convince, say, a British public that this is going to be, you know, good, whether you care about this issue or not, what would you say?
I think, you know, in the UK there has been a lot of publicity regarding what you mentioned, criminalizing homelessness and these kind of absurd and nonsense things. But, you know, at the end of the day, if you don't care about your fellow citizens, someone's children, you know, they are someone's family. If you don't care about them, then you usually care about the money that you have, because when people are housed with the support, it eventually will save taxpayers' money compared that they would be on the streets or shelter or temporary accommodation without knowing where to sleep next night. And then it's not giving away homes, I would say, because people pay the rent. If they don't have a job or anything like that, they can pay the rent with the benefits that they are entitled to as anyone else in that situation. So it's not giving away anything. They are still paying the rent and they get the support they need to do it. And then again, I think we have some good statistics showing that, the housing retention rate for people in the housing first is almost 90%. So 9 people out of 10 who have been gotten the home and the support they need are housed within 2 years period, so that they remain housing and they are not remaining into homelessness, which is a really, really great thing. And then, everyone who's able to go back to school or back to some kind of education or work activities or anything between, I think it's a plus for us in that sense that, without the home and the support, that wouldn't be possible. And then the third thing would be that, like I mentioned, it's quite equal with the financial side of the things, but in Canada, for example, there's a study which shows that in the city of Toronto, in one area, 155 people experiencing homelessness are using one hospital's emergency services 11,000 times during a 6-month period. And how that relates into reality in your case is that if you have a heart attack and you enter into emergency services, you have to wait before you get the help because they are out of resources down there. So when you house people and they don't need to use these emergency services and these kind of things, it actually saves the resources from the hospital and they can put it somewhere else. And it means that when you have the heart attack, you are able to get the help immediately without waiting.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that I very reluctantly, I think I'm starting to accept that I don't know whether it's just personality types, whether it's people's life experiences, probably a combination, that
Yes.
we're not going to ever, I don't know, maybe that's me being defeatist, but I just feel like there's always going to be people in society, in, the population that for whatever reason have low empathy or zero empathy for and simply look at someone in that situation, say, it's your fault. You could work your way out of that situation, right? I don't know. Do you think that's right? Do you think you can help people learn to become more compassionate? I mean, is that part of what you do at all?
I think it's part of it, and this kind of mind shift of people that they start to see that these are our human fellow citizens. That they are not just, some people call them addicts or these kind of things, but they are just our neighbors living in our communities, our cities. Don't you think that we should take care of them? But it's a hard work, and I think in Finland, when we renovate the shelters and the temporary accommodation, we were in a quite swift pace, we were able to house people from the streets. I think that made a big difference in people's mind, because when they realized that, hey, this is possible and we can take care of the people, I think that triggered something that, people might start to feel like, hey, maybe it wasn't people's fault, maybe it was system's fault. And now when we have changed the system, those people are housed and they remain housed. So I think it needs a little bit of success as well.
You just got to do it first and hopefully the results follow.
Yeah, and I think you have the perfect wording there. You just got to do it. Just do it. But of course, it needs a good affordable housing stock and it needs political will. Those things are mandatory, in my opinion, to have a great success.
So you need sort of like a number of very key ingredients to come together at the right time. That obviously, I mean, that sounds like that's happened in Finland, through a lot of hard work, perhaps the right politician on the right side of the spectrum, all of that came together beautifully. Would you say then, like in terms of individual stories, how quickly have you seen people's lives turn around? But also conversely, how long sometimes do you need to give it?
Well, I think the beauty of the housing first is that, the support can last as long as needed. And then the reality is that some people need the support for the rest of their lives. When I was support worker, some of my tenants, they were young adults, most of them. And then, their situation could be that they need some support, how to change the light bulb, how to make dinners at home.
Oh, wait, stop, hang on. So you're talking, okay, first of all, young people. I don't know if I don't know whether you're able to share some of the story, like individual stories of like, how did they end up in that situation and like...
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think with the young people, the most common was that, they weren't able to pay their rent in the previous apartment and then try to fix the situation with these so-called high-interest flash loans. So you end up in a bigger problems in the future because you can't pay those flash loans back and then you end up losing your credits. And that's how it's really, really hard to get apartment from the private market. And that's why, young people can end up being homeless. And then but that was one of the stories. And then with the young people, there are unfortunately these things that you end up dealing with drugs and then you just lose the control of your apartment in that sense that it's not you who are causing the problems with the neighbors, but it's usually the people you are with. So not the people who cause this, partying all the time and causing problems to neighbors who then complain to the landlord, and at the end of the day you lose your apartment because of that. And that those things happens as well. But mostly financial situation, and then the other part was this ending up dealing with drugs and other substances.
So let me because this is actually genuinely changing my perception as we're speaking, because the stories that I would associate probably, and again, I'm like, where do I get this from? This is assumptions, I'm pretty sure. Is there will have been some sort of childhood trauma, there will have been some, definitely abuse, addiction in the household, all these things, right? And obviously it's not people's fault they're born in these households, but that's where they end up and da-da-da-da-da. And what you're telling me, the picture you've just painted, which is, a young person emerging into their adult life, shaky ground financially, they take out a few loans, it all spirals out of control. Honestly, most of us are a few paychecks away from that situation, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's not that different. And I think what is one of the most shocking news I heard from UK and from USA as well is that, a lot of the people working with homeless people, the support workers, they are one paycheck away from being homeless by themselves. So that is the reality we are living.
That's incredibly sobering.
When you think about it, that, the support workers are the ones who should support the homeless people and the people who have, a lot of trauma in their life. And then when your own situation is quite shaky as well, it can be quite hard for people. And that's why we are seeing a lot of turnovers in the homelessness sector at the moment, that, a lot of people are leaving the work to do something else because of that, it doesn't pay well enough. And then again, and some situation, you can see that, hey, that could be my future at some period of time. So it can be quite scary.
Because actually the other thing, so, I'm hearing obviously it's affordable housing, inflation, wage stagnation, all that stuff. Basically, paycheck to paycheck living. But then there was something else you mentioned as well, which I almost let slip by, but I've got to bring it back in, which is divorce. That's... a massive life event. I've been through it. It sucks. I can say that much about it. It does, present challenges on many levels, but certainly financial as well. I'm just trying to work out, what are the profiles? So we've got young people on shaky financial ground, divorcees. Is there how would you start profiling, homelessness and rough sleepers? And has that changed in the time that you've been working?
Well, it had changed quite a bit. And if we look at Finland's situation, for example, in the 1980s and 1990s, most of the homeless people were middle-aged men. And then we called them, back then it was like these men of the forest. So they would be living in the forest or under the bridge, and the main thing would be like alcohol use. So they have drink their home, basically.
Right.
But that was in the early 90s and 80s. But now the situation is totally different. So so the face of homelessness, so to speak, is it's more broad. So there are a lot of not lot, but there are youth homelessness in Finland. There are more women experiencing homelessness, immigrants, and these kind of things. So of course it has meant that the Housing First we started 2008. It has developed altogether, of course, because all the people, they have different support needs, of course. So that has meant that we have to develop the work everywhere all the time because there are more groups entering into homelessness, which is unfortunate, of course, but that is the reality we are living. But in the Finnish context, still the main portion of the homeless population is middle-aged men, but we are seeing more young homeless people, women homelessness, and then immigrants as well. But I think we also learn from abroad many things. So, for example, the women homelessness, we could see the rise of women homelessness in other countries before it actually hit to Finland.
Like which ones?
So,
which countries?
For example, UK and some Southern European countries, the women homelessness rise there, and we could notice that. And in that sense, we were a little bit prepared, I could say. and for example, at the Y Foundation in 2018, we started a project regarding women homelessness and developed some services, especially for women experiencing homelessness. So I think there has been a link in that sense, a good link that we have worked internationally with different organizations abroad, that we could have see like these trends coming up different part of Europe and US and Canada. So we can say, okay, we know that those things are coming to Finland as well. Maybe we should prepare and make sure that we could prevent most of it happening altogether.
Affordable housing has come up quite a bit. And how has the Finnish approach been to that?
Well, it has been for the past 70 years that, we need state-subsidized affordable housing to make sure that the low-income people working in the service industry or in the stores or restaurants and, working in these kind of services, they can afford to live in the cities. And then I think one of the main things in Finland is that, we are not building affordable housing just on the outskirts of the cities, but it's everywhere in the city centers, on the seaside, there's everywhere affordable housing. And I think good example is the city of Helsinki, where their goal, whenever there's a new living area coming up, for example, the goal is to have at least 25% of affordable housing, because they have understood that it's the best way to avoid segregation. It's a great way to work with social integration, to have people with different backgrounds, different income levels, living in the same areas, sharing the same services, children playing in the same playgrounds and these kind of things. So I think it creates, safer cities and coherent cities just for everyone. And then I think, then again, one of the most important parts of the work has also been that, if you ever walk in the city of Helsinki, you won't notice which buildings are affordable housing because the quality is really good. So those are the things that I'm really proud of in the Finnish context regarding the affordable housing. But the city of Helsinki and their zoning policies is really outstanding, in my opinion.
Wow. So what harm does inequality do to society? Because what you're describing is a more equal society functioning well.
Yeah.
What is the harm that inequality does to a society that you've seen when you've traveled?
Well, I think you have a good example in some of the rich part in the UK and in the US where you have to build fences. So I think that explains a lot. In Finland, we don't have to build fences to in some of the neighborhoods. It's, normal neighborhoods everywhere. And then again, I think Sweden, our loved neighbor country, is a good example as well, where they have built affordable housing, but only in the outskirts of the cities, which has created these kind of low-income areas outside of the cities, which has created different kind of problems and challenges, so that, people are afraid to go there and police are afraid to go there and these kind of things. So I think in that sense, it has created so many different possibilities here in Finland when we are, there is equality in the cities and in the society, and everyone is welcomed everywhere, and then in the same playground, there can be someone making 10 million euros a year and someone who is making 10,000 euros a year, sharing the same playgrounds with their children. So I think that's quite beautiful.
Wow. Yes, it does sound like paints a beautiful picture. Do you see this working in global South countries?
Yeah, I actually just last week got an email from South Africa, from Johannesburg, from one organization, and I'm having a chat with them in a couple of weeks. So let's see. But I think it's housing first is like this global method that basically can work everywhere regarding where you are living. And then we have been working for the past year. We have done some work with the city of Sao Paulo, for example, in Brazil, and then Buenos Aires, Argentina, and then in the end of May we are having visitors. This Institute of Global Homelessness is visiting us here in Helsinki, and they are working with many countries around Asia and South America and Africa and so on. So I think there is this kind of global momentum regarding the housing first, and I don't see why it wouldn't work, but I think what it needs is adaptation to the model. So it cannot work the same way everywhere. So you need to adapt the housing first model into your own context and see what you have and what kind of society system you have and make it work with that.
Let's say you really did just rule the world and you could do absolutely anything. So I'm just wondering if there are maybe 3 things that you would change to end homelessness globally. I mean, is there an answer that you could give to that?
I think everywhere in the world, I would start building affordable housing today, because that is the best way to prevent homelessness on a structural level. And then I would change the systems into housing first everywhere, so that the home with the support comes first, and then people can take care of the other things. And then the third part would be that, I would lift the wages, the minimum wages, so that people can afford their housing and buy the other things in their lives in a meanwhile as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Juha, I just wanted to ask you towards the end, what do you think our listeners need to know about you to understand who you are, why this issue resonates with you, why you do what you do?
It resonates for me because I have been working with people in disadvantaged positions for almost all my adult life, and I have seen the pain, what it causes to families and people experiencing homelessness or whatever other challenges they may have, and I want to make a change. I want a world where everyone should have a home of their own and shouldn't worry about where to lay their head in the evening, and have that safe place to call home. And that drives me. And of course now with this title, Head of International Affairs, I have been in a privileged position that I have been able to travel around different countries and see the reality, what is happening on the streets, and hearing those stories and everything between. It gives me energy and even more passion to do the work every day and try to ensure that one day housing would be a human right for all and not just a privilege for the few.
In wanting to do a podcast exploring structural and systemic barriers to positive change, in other words, why does the world seem so fucked even though there's so many people trying to make it better? I have once again strayed way out of my lane, out of my usual campaign space, and come back as if bearing news from a distant land. So what can I tell you? Well, my takeaways from listening to Juha are that the barriers to ending homelessness are many and varied, but the job begins with challenging a few really basic assumptions. So in my mind, these are: 1, rough sleepers and the homeless are just part of the scenery. It can't be changed. 2, that homelessness is a product of being born in the wrong family, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. It just can't be helped. And 3, probably the worst of all the assumptions, is homelessness is just down to bad decisions and bad behavior by bad people, and they shouldn't be helped. I don't know, maybe some of that is true, maybe all of that is true. But according to a 2021 survey run by the UK charity Crisis, this pretty much sums up Britain's attitude to homelessness. And just to give you some more receipts, another survey, a UK YouGov poll, found that reducing homelessness and providing social housing ranked below maintaining roads and just above bins and bin collections and recycling in how people felt councils should be prioritising their spending. This is even though over 90% of people asked felt homelessness was a serious problem. So I think between all of that, there is this sense that homelessness is a problem that just can't be fixed or it just isn't a priority. But listening to Juha, though, I think he makes a really strong case that whether you care or not, it costs society more just in cold, hard cash. 15,000 euros per person per year, that figure again, not to find homes for rough sleepers, those in shelters and in temporary accommodation. And maybe this is a really good moment to bring in Maria, one of our listeners, who sent in this comment, which is right on the money as far as this episode goes. And this was her answer to the question of, what would you do if you rule the world? And she writes, I'd stop building affordable housing and make the houses we already have affordable. We're kicking wildlife out of their homes. And yes, Maria, absolutely, this doesn't have to be a build frenzy. As in Finland, affordable housing can mean repurposing old office buildings and shelters, etc. I know many of you, lovely listeners, feel really passionate about the natural world and about all the non-human life that we share this beautiful planet with. But there is something about this episode that stirs up just a feeling I've never been able to shake off, and I've not really refined it into fully coherent thought yet, but it's something around the tension that I feel of where do we put our focus, where do we put all our resources and attention between helping nature and helping people. I wonder if we can truly take care of the planet until we take care of people first. What do you think? Let me know. You can email me on podcast@gillianburkevoice.com, or you can send me comments on Instagram. You can use the Q&A function on Spotify. Please follow the podcast if you're listening on Spotify or Apple. That way you get notified when new episodes drop. But most importantly, share the podcast with anyone you think who will enjoy it and help spread the word. A huge thank you, as always, to our exclusive sponsors, Triodos Bank, for making this conversation possible. And a huge, huge thank you to Juha for taking the time to guide me through this campaign space to end homelessness and make sure everyone has a home. Home. Still the most beautiful word I know. Thank you for listening.